It's the final week in our True Life Teacher Confession series. And this week we're ending with a really good one that I think a lot of you can relate to. This teacher said, I grade everything because I feel like I have to. I have no life because of it and no desire to want to grade. I need students to know that every assignment is important, even if it isn't graded, so I just grade it all to motivate them. Does this sound familiar to you? I'm sure it does for so many of you because I've been in this exact same place, and I have a lot to say about this because I am obsessed with supporting teachers and grading less in their classrooms because I really think when you look at all the responsibilities we have as secondary science teachers, grading becomes the one that is the easiest to cut back on and still have such an effective classroom culture, learning experience, all of that. So I desperately want to help this teacher who submitted this confession and anyone else who feels this way. So let's get right into it. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I am passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You are in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. So this teacher's confession had a lot in it. So I'm going to break it apart into two chunks, and I just kind of want to bust some misconceptions that I heard when reading this confession, and then I'll hit you with some solutions at the end for how we're going to combat this. So first, this teacher said, I want to remind you, I grade everything because I feel like I have to. I have no life because of it and no desire to want to grade. And when I hear that, I think, of course you have no life. Like, if you grade everything, you will literally have no life unless you're like a speed grader. Or maybe if you have like a double planning period and only one prep and no extracurricular responsibilities. Like if that's you, then maybe you can grade every single thing. But if that doesn't apply to you, then yeah, you're going to have no life. Because here's the problem that is always inevitable if you grade everything or nearly everything. It's that you always get to the point that you have no desire to grade because it's just too much. And then when you have no desire to grade, it leads to one of three things happening typically. One, you rush through just to get it done. And then that means you're going to have bad and not helpful feedback for them to learn from. You're just going to get through it and scribble a number, and they're not going to be able to really learn from what they did wrong. Two, it can mean that you give delayed feedback, and then your students are receiving it so much later than after they did it. And then they don't even remember doing it. You're turning back a lab a week or two after they did it. They don't even remember what that lab was about. And I also find that if you do delayed feedback, you tend to grade unfairly because you're doing it in chunks, like you're grading a few people's here, a few people's there. And when you do that, you're not really giving partial credit as consistently. That's what I found in my experience. And then third, when you have no desire to grade, you literally end up spending all your time outside of contract hours grading. Maybe you're doing that so you can give them quality feedback and timely feedback, but then you burn out in 3 to 5 years because of your job and it has become your life instead of just being your job, like we talked about in a past episode. So again, when you're grading all these things, one of three things is going to inevitably happen. You're going to be rushing and not giving good feedback. You're going to be giving good feedback, but it's delayed. And then that's not really as helpful for your students. And typically when you do the delayed grading, it's not as fair. Or three, you're going to give quality feedback and timely feedback, but then you're having no life. And then you're going to burn out. Okay, so that's a lot of issues there. Now let's talk about the other thing that this teacher said. They said, I need students to know that every assignment is important, even if it isn't graded. So I just grade it all to motivate them. Okay, and I'm not trying to be dramatic here, but if you feel this way, just like this teacher, to me, that means your students have gaslit you. They have convinced you that they have no intrinsic motivation whatsoever and can only be motivated to do anything if they have a reward to it. And I'm not saying that's maybe it's not entirely gaslighting. Maybe there is truth to it and maybe they really do feel that way. But that is some unhinged apathy. That is crazy town to hear coming out of the mouths of 14 to 18-year-olds, which is the ages of most of your students. Okay, they are way too old to have that much immaturity and that little resilience, okay? And I'm not saying this is your fault per se, okay? This is a chronic problem we've all seen over the last 5 years since the pandemic. And it's just being reinforced over and over again until we start to put our foot down and really push students to be different, okay? And I have so many thoughts about this. I have 4 podcast episodes you need to listen to that I've already recorded in the past that address this kind of ideology that your students might be having and this kind of attitude they might be having and lack of work ethic. So I have episode 64, how to re-engage apathetic students and maybe manage your own apathy if that's a problem for you. Episode 155 is how to create active and accountable learners in your classroom. Episode 145 is how to build resilience in students post-pandemic. And then episode 123 is what to do when you care more than your students, because it sounds like you care about their grades more than they do since you're grading everything for them to make them do stuff. So episodes 64, 155, 145, 123 all touch on things that I think would really help you with this. But to summarize, before you just leave this episode and go listen to those, is the only way we can combat this is by actively pushing against it and holding the line. And this is the perfect time to talk about this with you in the school year because you can set a different precedent next school year. Just stop doing it. Y'all, I'm not a parenting expert by any means. My sample size is 3 children. But I have noticed over and over again, as I've parented my children through different stages, that quitting cold turkey tends to be the best case scenario. I know people talk about what they do when there's a time change with their kids' sleeping schedule or when they have to get rid of the passy or when they drop the swaddle. I know these are a lot of baby things. Or, when they decide to transition to the big boy bed or get rid of diapers or whatever. I genuinely think in all these different things that I've done, just cutting it cold turkey and saying, okay, we're not doing that anymore. This is the new thing has gone so much better than trying to do something gradual. For instance, okay, it's time change. Okay, now we get up an hour later, we get up an hour earlier. I'm not doing this 15 minutes every day. We just change the alarm. That's what we do. I remember every time I potty trained my children, one day they woke up and there were no more diapers in the house. And it's here's the potty and this is where we go. I genuinely think it's very painful, but it's very painful for a short amount of time. And when you hold the line on these things, they just learn to fall in line. Whereas when you try to do things really gradually, I think back to the dropping the swaddle days and a lot of friends are like, okay, I'm going to do 1 arm out and then I'm going to do, 2 arms out, but they're in a sleep sack and da-da-da. And it ends up taking, 3 to 6 months. I just think changing things sharply and drastically is a great way to do it. And this clean cut of a new school year and starting fresh with new students is a great way to do it. Y'all, every teacher I interview on this podcast who I ask about grading, this is real life. If you go back to every guest interview, they all say that they just don't grade everything and they have a culture where their students do the work anyway. And you can create that culture too. You cannot start with the habit of I'll grade everything and now I'm going to slowly grade less and less and less. They're just going to complain and moan and groan. You just have to say, I'm not doing this. I have a course on how to create a classroom culture that's a part of the Secondary Science Simplified Virtual PD bundle. I'll link it in the show notes. We talk about stuff like this, but you have to create a culture where you're not enabling this kind of behavior. And I want you to know that you can put a stop to this. It doesn't have to be this way, okay? So I hope that you hear this with love because I want something different for you. I don't want you to hear this as you're doing a terrible job because you're not. You're not at all. I think, again, teachers are naturally altruistic and you care so much about your students to the detriment of yourself. And I just want to get back into more healthy equilibrium, if you will. So you have to put a hard line in the sand. I'm not going to grade everything. This is what I will grade. And now let's talk practically. let's talk solutions. Okay, how do we think about grading correctly so that then we're grading in a way that serves them and also is sustainable for us? I think it starts with remembering that grading should serve two purposes. And one of them is not getting your students motivated to do work. There's two purposes to grading. One, informing you, the teacher, of where your students are so that you can adjust your instruction accordingly. And then two, informing them of where they are so that they can get remedial help as they need it. Now, in order for these two purposes to be fulfilled, then everything you grade needs to, one, actually be read by you, because then you're not going to actually be able to use it to inform your instruction or tell them how they're doing. Two, be given quality and clear feedback. And three, everyone's least favorite, be graded and returned and gone over with students within 24 hours. I think this is so important. This lets them see the feedback while it's fresh in their minds and have time to get help if they do see, oh, I need remedial help here. And then it allows you to adjust your lesson plans if you see that the majority of the class is struggling. So for example, when I teach heredity in my biology class and I'm teaching Punnett squares, we do Punnett squares in class for a few days. And I do check things for completion just for like a little 10-point. Like if you're like, they will not be motivated, you could do a little 10-point spot check, okay, to make them do stuff. I think that's an easy compromise here. But usually about day 3, I will then collect something that they've done about Punnett squares. And actually, I read every single thing, I grade it, I provide feedback, whatever. I get that back to them the next day. If I see that the majority of the class is like not getting it, we're not moving on to dihybrids. We're going to stay in monohybrids a little longer. But if most people are getting it, this just tells me, oh, these 3 to 5 students, they need to come in for tutoring. And they have time to do that now before they get to the quiz on Punnett squares, or especially before we get to my heredity unit test. So it serves everyone this way when you treat grading this way. Now, how do we actually do this? Okay, how do we get to the place where everything we grade, we actually have the time to read, give feedback to, and return quickly? One, you stop using grading for motivation for your students. Again, see all those episodes I previously mentioned at the beginning of the year. If this feels like way too drastic, switch to doing some spot checks for completion, but not like 100-point completion. That's insane. Like 10 points because you did the practice handout. Cool. I'll check you off and give you the 10 out of 10 because you got through all of it, whatever. Okay. But we're not going to treat grading as motivation for students to do work. Grading is to inform you and is to inform them. The second thing is you train your students from day one to work without the reward of grading. One of the ways I do this is I do not tell them what's graded and what's not. They should not need to know, because knowing whether or not it's graded should not be the motivating factor for how hard they try. Now, of course, will that give some of your students some anxious feelings? Yes, but if they see that you're a generous grader and you're still giving them plenty of grades, there's still plenty of buffer grades in there with completion stuff, they learn to not stress out about this. Obviously, they know tests are going to be graded, but they don't need to know every lab's going to be graded. Or especially when you do a lab, they don't need to know which parts are going to grade, and you don't need to grade every part of every lab. And that comes to point 3. You have to actively choose to grade way less. And I have an entire podcast episode of tips about this, talking about labs specifically, all sorts of things. Episode 160, I'll link it in the show notes as well. You need to listen to that one too. Okay, but this is how we actually do this. So here is your take-home challenge today. And I don't normally do this, but here it is. Okay, I want your help on this, because sometimes I feel like when we're on a hamster wheel of grading everything, it's almost like a cult. And when you're in a cult, your reality gets distorted and we can't remember what's true and what's not. And so it's impossible to imagine life being a different way. So some of you are listening to me talking for the last 10 minutes and you're like, Rebecca, you're crazy and what you're saying is impossible. And so here's what I need if you're listening. If you have heard me talk about this stuff, whether that's because you took my Secondary Science Simplified course and it's all over that course, or you just heard me talking about this on the podcast for the last 3+ years, and you've implemented some of these changes I recommended, and you've kind of gotten out of this unhealthy grading cult mindset, and you've seen what it's like to have life on the other side, will you please DM me on Instagram and tell me? It's not rocket science. Rebecca Joyner, that's my name. I'd love this week that this episode airs to just have a bunch of case studies from y'all that are on the other side of this, who maybe didn't believe me when I said this was possible, and then you tried it and now you've seen the other side, and I want to reshare them. It'll be anonymous, of course. I always will like crop out your name and I put like a heart over your picture so no one can see. But I just think social proof would help so many teachers listening to see that this is something that they can experience too. So if you're willing to help me help others be pulled out of that like grading pit of doom, please DM me on Instagram. It would make me so happy. If you're not an Instagram person, you can always email me, Rebecca@itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com. I'd love to hear from you. That's your take-home challenge today. And if you're like, I'm in the pit of doom and I don't see how this is possible, follow me on Instagram so you can look out for those screenshots that hopefully I'll be able to post. And then also check out the show notes, which can be found at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 189. And you'll find links to all those old episodes I've done that really talk about this so much, because I just want you to hear them, because I just want life to be so different for you this school year. It sounds like probably I've had an energy drink, which I don't, but like, I just want to hug each of you so hard that's listening to this, and then maybe like grip your shoulders and shake you a little bit and be like, it can be different. And this is such a good time of year to decide to do things differently and have that fresh start at the beginning of the year, fresh group of students. A different life is possible. You can have a life, because teaching is not your life. It is your job, and we can stop grading everything. You can do it. I promise you. Okay? Shoot me that DM on Instagram. I would love to hear from you who have been on the other side. Let's help each other out. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.